How do you make a pie crust?
Well, I put some flour in a bowl, sprinkle a little salt over it.
Do you measure the flour or the salt?
No,
Absolutely not.
no. And I put some shortening in or lard or whatever I have in camp. And I sprinkle a little cold water over it and toss it with a fork. You don't want to handle it too much. You sure don't want to knead it. It's not bread. And then when it feels right, you just roll her out and put it on the pie.
That's so unhelpful.
Sorry.
Yeah. So just do that, daily for 40 years, which is actually more like 60 or 70 years. And then it might be right.
Yeah, most of the time it's right.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. The Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Sig Sauer. SIG is a leading provider and manufacturer of firearms, electro-optics, ammunition, air guns, and suppressors. For over 250 years, Sig Sauer Inc. has evolved and thrived by blending American ingenuity, German engineering, and Swiss precision. Today, Sig Sauer is synonymous with industry-leading quality and innovation, which has made it the brand of choice amongst the U.S. military, the global defense community, law enforcement, competitive shooters, hunters, and responsible citizens. Sig Sauer is also a premier provider of elite firearms instruction and tactical training at the Sig Sauer Academy located in New Hampshire. For more information about Sig Sauer and its complete line of products, visit sigsauer.com. I don't know. I've been thinking about where to start. It's always interesting where a story starts, right? Because there's things that happen before the start of a story that make the story possible. But what's the story of your dad?
The story of my dad is very long, but I can try to make it brief. My dad was born in New Jersey at the time when immigrants were, it was a hard time. He was of Irish and German descent. Immigrants, and it was a hard time. They were sort of discriminated against, and to put it just briefly, they were poor. And when you're poor, your nutrition isn't good, and a lot of them had tuberculosis. And so my grandma, that I never knew, Jenny Glennon Bachman, died of tuberculosis and left my dad and his siblings orphaned at a young age, and therefore Grandpa Bachman, who in those days was drinking, I guess, and then he was distraught at Grandma's death and being left with children, so he couldn't handle things, so he jumped in the river and drowned and left his clothes on the bank. So I can't imagine how it was like for the children, my dad included, but it had to be dealt with, and Daddy had choices. He could go to an aunt that had 13 children, they were Catholic, who lived in the country, or he could go to the city to another aunt that could educate him, and living would be a little easier. But my dad always loved the country and animals, and he chose the country. So the other siblings went off to the city. This was in New Jersey, somewhere around Newark. Anyway, he went to the country and was around animals, but the aunt was understandably overworked with her own 13 children, and consequently it was not a very healthy environment for my dad.
How old was he at this time?
Well, it was before he was, I don't know exactly how many years he stayed there because this is all just what he told me, but he was 16 when he left that environment, and somehow got himself to Rutgers University and took a short course in animal husbandry at 16. And a short course doesn't last very long, but he graduated. In fact, I have the certificate of his graduation signed by the professors. And he was offered a job, a free ticket west, to accompany the first registered Jersey herd destined for the University of California at Davis.
Jersey milk cows?
Yes, it was the first Jersey breeding herd, so it probably was young heifers, cows, and a very valuable bull. It was the start of the registered Jersey herd at the University of California at Davis, which was a cow college.
About what year are we talking now?
Oh, boy. I was born in 1933, so it had to be in the 1920s. And, of course, it wasn't uncommon for orphans there were orphan trains, that brought orphans out from the east to the west to get jobs on ranches and stuff. Lots of orphans. But anyway, Daddy was on this train with the Jersey cattle, and he took to them. He loved animals. His job was to clean the box cars. They were box cars. To clean them every day, put fresh straw in, water. They would stop at places and take the cattle out and exercise them. They had to be fed a ration of grain and the finest hay. These were valuable cattle. It was the first registered herd to be brought to California. So he did a good job. It was hard. He talked about having lice. He slept with the cattle. And his main concern was the cattle. So his story to me was that they came through Auburn, California in March. And in March in California, the pear trees are in bloom. Everything's green. The oak trees are budding out. It's beautiful. The foothills of California. And he peeked through the boxcar slats, and the train stopped to take on water, and so he could clean the boxcar. And he looked at that beautiful rolling foothill land, and he said, someday I'm going to have my own little dairy here. He was only 16. The train continued on to Davis, and they unloaded the cattle, and Professor Reagan took one look at this boy who had taken care of these cattle. They were delivered in excellent shape. There wasn't a speck of manure on them. They were clean. They were well fed. And Daddy was so proud of them and in love with those cows. And anyway, Professor Reagan took a liking to him and told him that he could live in the dairy barn and he would pay his way through college. And that's what Daddy did. And all of his life, I remember him telling me, I was the oldest of 5 children, so I listened to my dad probably more than the others because I was interested in cattle too, and Daddy's whole life was cows. And so he taught me to milk when I was 4, but I listened to his stories, and he would have tears in his eyes when he would talk about the people at Davis, the cow college, Cal Aggies they were. And he couldn't say enough about the university and the people. And then, I don't know how, I guess the professors put him in contact with Peter Judge Shields, who was the Superior Court Judge of California at that time. Anyway, he started a Jersey dairy as a result of those cattle coming. And Daddy worked for him, and he helped him. And people saw in Daddy this rare quality of knowing animals. Like he would memorize the pedigree of a certain individual animal clear back to the Isle of Jersey. Then he started showing cattle. There was a select group of showman in California, and he knew so much about cattle that he was in demand, and he worked for some of the top Guernsey herds in the state of California, Barnegat Ranch in Grass Valley, Clovertop Ranch out of Lincoln, and Ador Farms in Los Angeles. Well, somewhere along the line he met Mama, but the Depression came and it was terrible. It was just terrible. But he met my mother and he fell in love with her, and she was from kind of an English family that was intellectual and college graduated and very different from his upbringing, and they weren't too happy about their daughter marrying my daddy, but he did. And in the 1930s, they moved to the San Fernando Valley, and the Depression was, right at its peak, and there were long bread lines where people would wait just for a loaf of bread, but Daddy didn't have to do that because he milked cows for Ador Farms at Camarillo. So he commuted from San Fernando Valley to Camarillo and milked cows. And
How many cows a day was he milking? And this was by hand, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but Ador exists today, I think. I've never been back to the San Fernando Valley where I was born there, but it was a very, very large dairy, and it had a reputation. But all I know is that Daddy milked cows and he had a paycheck, so we didn't have to be in the bread line.
What do you remember about growing up during the Depression?
Well, see, I was born in 1933, and my parents left, I think, before I was a year old and moved to Grass Valley, where Daddy was the manager of Barnegat Farms, registered Guernseys in Grass Valley. Of course, we lived at Barnegat a few years, and then Daddy went to other dairies, showed cattle, showed them at the World's Fair at Treasure Island, had Grand Champion Bull. That was what he did. He would come to a dairy and take their registered Guernseys and make champions out of them, and then move on to another one. But his dream was always to have a ranch of his own. So we finally did get 240 acres. The war, it didn't affect us because, I don't know, my parents were really unusual. And of course, we didn't have media. I don't remember listening to the radio except for Fibber McGee and Molly. And, we didn't, at least I didn't listen to the radio, and we didn't have TV, and I was as interested in the cows as my dad, and I raised cows, and I was outside all the time. And I do remember that my mother and other mothers had to go into a tower and listen for planes. And then I had uncles. I had 2 uncles that were in the war. But the war was something that just didn't touch us. My grandma had little flags in the window that her sons were in the war, but my parents never talked about it. The only other thing was that Tomiko Kaneko and Hiroko Yoshikawa were Japanese classmates of mine, and they were very held in high esteem in the community, had beautiful truck gardens, and they were taken away to concentration camps. And I never really understood that until I read about it later in life. I didn't understand that. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, my parents they kind of sheltered us from that, I guess, or they were so busy. They were just so busy.
Yeah, you would have been 9 years old.
Yeah, but apparently it was a real bad thing, but I didn't understand it.
Sure. Well, I mean, at 9, what are you really going to understand about the implications of something like World War when, you'd been growing up just kind of trying to survive and to keep working towards your own goals. It's got to seem very strange to, hear about a place like Pearl Harbor that maybe you've never heard of before, probably hadn't. And then the Japanese just attacked us. What does this mean?
Yeah, well, see, we didn't have media. We did not have the world being brought to our door. Our world was the little ranch we were on, and there was so much work to do, and it was such a joy because I would be gone all day out in the woods. I had a little trap line, and I just liked to be in the woods with the wild animals and or working with my cattle. And I'm ashamed to say I didn't learn how to cook. I didn't really help too much in the house. I helped Daddy build fence, and I hayed, and put up shocks of hay and the old mower and a horse and tromped hay and jumped in the creek. And our summers were just magic because, we were really pretty sheltered. We were very poor. All the money we made from the cream check went to pay the hay and the feed bill for the cows. Nothing went for the house or our clothes. My mother made all our clothes. We were really poor, but we never felt poor.
Yeah. And then, your dad continued milking cows of his own, and then you had your own Guernsey milk cows, and you were showing cattle. And then, what happened in high school? Like, did you graduate high school? How did that all go down?
Well, I was in 4-H, big time 4-H, and so I showed at all the county fairs and state fairs in summer. But yeah, I did go to high school. I was in the band. I was in the honor society. I was in the newspaper. But I fell in love with, or thought I was in love with, a cowboy at age 14 and married him at 17, and was told by the powers that be in high school that I couldn't graduate because I was married. And that was the rules. So that kind of threw me for a loop. And so I went to the school board and said, now, I have my life planned. I'd like to graduate, have a diploma. I think I deserve it. And I want to raise a family, and I want to live on a ranch, and I want to begin my life. I'm looking forward to it. I want to be a housewife, raise children. And I said, if I write an essay about this, would you consider it? And they said, well, we'll consider it. So I wrote an essay for English, and I did really well in English, and I got an A+ on it, and they let me graduate.
It's pretty amazing. And that was not the end of your writing career by any means.
Nope.
So where has writing taken you since then?
Well, first, I believe that a mother should take care of her children, that there's a time in life for things. And I always kept a journal, and I read voraciously. But now today, where is my writing taken me? Well, I joined the literary organization called Fish Trap here in Wallowa County. I helped organize the first Fish Trap organization, and it was the college. Looking back on it now, it was the college that I was denied because I had planned to go to the University of California at Davis, where my dad had gone, and that didn't happen. So I started writing a column, and I wrote a column for 31 years for a newspaper published in Pendleton called Agri-Times Northwest. And I wrote a book. Took 10 years to write a book about a local woman. I had her diaries from 1938 to 1980. That book's getting ready to go into its third printing. And just recently, a friend of mine has done the complicated technical stuff to have those 31 years of columns published in 6 volumes. And November 1st, you'll be able to access them on ebook, or you can order the volumes online or in bookstores. It's kind of mind-boggling. I can't really put my mind around what's happening lately.
Yeah. And you're working on some other books?
I'm working on a novel right now. I've never really written a novel, but it's based on Well, I have a little cabin down on Sheep Creek, and I went down there 4 months last year. And don't really want to talk about it too much right now because it's just in little bits and pieces, but I have it all in my mind. And it's based on that area down there in Dimnaha.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to when you're 17. You're married. You use an essay to sue your high school basically to let you graduate, which they do. And then what happens? Didn't you guys used to spend a bunch of time in the Sierras?
Oh, yes.
So what did that look like?
Well, I love the wilderness and being out in it, so I figured out ways to get there. I made it happen. So, I had 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. And that's, the way I did it with hand washing diapers and, there were no things like today. But I said to my husband, maybe we could get some burros and go into the mountains. And I just could envision us setting up our camp kind of there and then packing those burros and going up into the wilderness, and even with the kids. So that happened.
And how long would you stay in the mountains?
3 weeks. No tent. Sometimes my husband would have to go out to judge cattle at a fair or something, and he'd leave me up there with the 4 kids. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful because at this little lake, Maud Lake, there were native German brown trout, and there were no people. And I kept a diary all through the whole thing. And my son Todd was not even a year old.
My dad.
Your dad.
Yes.
He wasn't a year old. And we carried him in on a little baby pack, set up camp, and, had a big old copper boiler. I boiled diapers. And anyway, I figured out my menus, and we ate like kings because we had the trout, and then I would bring frozen beef in or venison. We ate a lot of wild meat. And if there was a snowbank, I'd put it in that. And then when the meat was gone, we'd have Spam, tuna. But I had always had a garden, so brought, potatoes and vegetables. And we ate really well. And I loved to cook over an open fire. It was my thing. And, the kids are so healthy, and it was a wonderful, wonderful part in our life to do that. We did that for years, just years.
When did you move to Oregon?
1968.
And tell me about that transition.
Well, my husband had ranch jobs, and it didn't allow for any vacation. But he finally got a job with the University of California at Davis as beef cattle herdsman. And that allowed for a 2 and 3 week vacation. We'd never had a vacation in our whole life. We worked 7 days. I worked right alongside him, showing cattle and the kids. I never had a babysitter, always had the kids. And so we came up here on a vacation because a man named Justin Snyder had moved from our area where we live there in Davis to a place called, I couldn't even pronounce it, Walla something. It turned out to be Wallowa County. And then we had another friend named Bill George, who also was with the university staff, pomology department. We didn't know him real well, but he was a friend of Justin's. And he said, if you come up sometime, you can stay with us. So we loaded all the kids and took off for a vacation. And we spent the first night in a motel, first motel our kids had ever been in. The next day we got on the road. We ended up in this county at night. It's a long, long way from Davis. And we had an old car. Usually had car trouble too. And we got here at night, and our friend Bill George had elk steak, potatoes and gravy, and rhubarb pie, which I'd never tasted anything so good in my whole life. Anyway, we were tired, so we went to bed. We got up in the morning. It was June. And I looked out the window on Alder Slope where he lived. And I looked across the road and there was this old house that was just kind of fallen down. And I said, you know, we got to live here. I'd even live in that old house that's falling down across the road. And the mountains were gleaming with new fallen snow. Everything was green. The air was pure. I just went to myself, it's going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. Anyway, 3 years it took, and it did happen. We left a secure job, insurance. We moved up here, and we had no job, no house to live in. Before the moving van got here, I found an old rented house to move our stuff into, and my husband found a job on the lower Imnaha at a place called Krell Creek. I think he made $200 or $300 a month and room and board. And I went to work at the hospital for $3.75 an hour. But we were here. That was 54, going on 54 years ago.
And when you got here, you know, with all the kids, it was just you, right? Lyman wasn't here, so the kids had to go out and start hunting immediately, didn't they?
Well, he went to work on the lower Imnaha, and that commute is impossible. And that didn't last too long because he got a job with Bill Wolf, had a Hereford ranch, and that was my husband's expertise. So Bill Wolf showed cattle in Texas. And so he took off with the show herd to Texas and was gone most of the winter. And he left before winter set in. And we were in this drafty house with no stove, no heating stove at all, and no wood. And our friend Bill George said, well, you just go on the radio. There's a thing called Swap and Shop, and say you want a stove. Well, we got a stove. And then Bill took us out in the woods, and anyway, we got our winter wood supply. But that stove was an Ashley stove, and they were notorious for not throwing out heat. And we didn't know anything about Wallowa County winters, and it turned out that winter of 68 was a doozy. It got down to 32 below, and the kids and I stood around with sleeping bags over us over that stove that didn't give off any heat, and the toilet cracked because it froze with ice, and the icicle in the bathtub didn't melt for 3 days. It was bad, but we made it, and we know about stoves and getting wood in and everything now.
Did Lyman hunt when you guys were in California?
Oh, yeah. We lived on venison. Yeah, he was quite a hunter, and he hunted up here too. When he got back from Texas, and we got through that first horrible year, and then he went into logging and got a job, and he hunted. He kept meat all the time for us.
Gotcha. So Lyman hunted in California, and I imagine that was mostly like black-tailed deer, mule deer, stuff like that.
It was, and I always went along. I packed a .243 rifle for hundreds of miles and never shot an animal, but I cooked for men. He always had hunting partners, and I loved it because we went up in the Desolation Valley Wilderness area to Lake Schmidl, all those lakes. I can't remember them now, but and there weren't a lot of blacktail up there, but when you got one, it was a good one. Nice. And they had to be packed out, not with animals. I remember a fellow named Art Caseman packed one out in his back, and he would take turns with Lyman pack a long way, miles. But Lyman was a wonderful hunter, and he always got his buck, and we had good meat.
Well, I never really got to know him when he was healthy. You know, he's basically sick for all of my life that I can remember, but anybody that ever talked about him being a good shot. Oh,
he was. He was not only a good shot, he was strong, and he was wonderful with horses, and he rode. He had kind of a rough life too, and but he was strong of body and mind, and good hunter. Yeah.
But didn't work out between the two of you as can happen, and you ended up marrying Doug Tippett later on.
I did.
Who's also since passed away. Tell me about Papa Doug.
Well, I was married almost 40 years to him, and I don't regret it. He owned the Doug Bar Ranch on Snake River when we were married. He owned 3,000 acres in what we call the hills. They call it the Zumwalt Prairie, but the hills, the Salmon Creek, Butte Creek country. Beautiful rangeland, and he had a large cow-calf outfit. And then he had the Valley Ranch on Prairie Creek, which was where our headquarters was. And he leased the East Moraine for 25 years. And then he had a very large sweet potato operation, certified sweet potatoes, for over 20 years, and had leased land for that. And yeah, that was huge. And
he was one of the early river pilots in Hell's Canyon.
Yes, he was. He was a guide and had a wonderful reputation. He had clients that came from all over the world every year, and they hunted deer, chuckers, fish, sturgeon. He had a boat that he would take them drop camps up the river or on horseback. And I didn't know him during the heyday of that. He was just going out of the business when I married him, but I did get to cook for the last hunts that he did have at Doug Bar, and talk to his clients, and he was very respected for getting the game, and the game was plentiful. Oh my goodness. I even got to hunt with him down there, and you'd go up those draws up Doug Creek and what we call the Palace, and beautiful mule deer, would flush out of there, and lots of chuckers. Oh my gosh, the chuckers. So many chuckers. And I used to love to hunt those.
And lots of, later on, I guess, there was lots of elk hunting out there in the hills, out in the Zumwalt.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my columns that'll be published will be full of all those stories because, yeah, I shot my share, but he knew their habits and where they'd be and how to hunt them, and he didn't have a whole lot of patience with people that just rushed in there to shoot him. There was a tactics that you had to use, and he was usually right.
Well, and the goal was never to shoot one elk. There's times that there'd be half a dozen or 10 elk that were dead all at once that we'd be bringing back in trailers and skinning out with tractors, and it was
right.
It was about making there be less elk out there eating that grass, and also bringing in a bunch of meat for a bunch of guys all at once.
Well, understandably, he had a large cattle operation, and that relies totally on grass, and the elk would get there early in the spring before we turned out, because we always like to let the grass get a good start. And May 1st was turnout time, but the elk like that grass too, and they'd get out there and there'd be thousands of them, and they'd just eat that grass down before we even got on. And he and the other ranchers had it really rough. They had an ongoing war with getting those elk numbers down. Yeah.
Which, that war continues on today. There's still 5,000 or 6,000 head of elk out there, primarily on private land, almost exclusively on private land, almost all of it on land that are their cattle ranches. Again, completely relying on that grass. So it's a tough thing trying to find the balance of all that.
Yeah, it was, fences were down, and no one knows how many hours our hired man and my husband and me too put up fence that a whole herd would knocked down. And then, the water holes that my husband built, he built the ponds. They used those, and then the salt we put out. And, I don't think people realized, they just didn't realize till they saw it themselves. So every chance he could to get a cow hunt or something to bring those numbers down, the ranchers had to do that for survival.
You mentioned that when you were young, you didn't know how to cook, but you've made quite a comeback on that. You're now in the Pie Hall of Fame. You're renowned all over as a wonderful cook in what is essentially a home style Western cooking, I think is the way I would describe it. But you cooked for some outfits in the backcountry here, some other outfitters. I think that backcountry cooking really hasn't changed all that much, except for, now we have a lot more freeze-dried stuff, which, I could really do without. But what was cooking like when you were like cooking for the Isleys and some of these other outfitters?
Oh my gosh, it was wonderful. I have to tell you a story about Manford. He's one of the top as far in my book, but the first job I took, of course, my background of being in the wilderness areas of California in the Sierras was top training, because not only did I deal with pack animals, but I cooked, I knew how to cook over an open fire. Anyway, my mother came up and watched the kids and left me off at Manford's place. And he said, and this was probably about 5:00 in the evening. And, in October, this was just the day before season was opening, or 2 days before or something. And he said, I have to go milk the cow. I said, okay. He went and milked his cow, 2 gallons of milk in glass jars. And then he had this other stuff that he kind of threw together, and we had to drive to Indian Crossing. And Indian Crossing is on the upper Imnaha, and we were in Joseph. And we had a cattle truck with horses in it, and there was all this stuff. And he had been setting up drop camps. I was the deluxe mule deer camp cook. That was my title. But he had drop camps all over, and he'd been all week setting those up. So he was tired. So this truck, which was an old truck, he said, I'm going to go to sleep. You have to drive. And so I drove. I was just turning 40. And so I drove that truck, and he said, wake me up if you get to a place you don't know where to turn. I'd never been to Indian Crossing. Anyway, got to Indian Crossing, and there was a supply tent, and we were waiting for a pack string to come from the deluxe camp up in what's called the Forks on the upper Imnaha. So it didn't show, and it didn't show, and didn't show. So finally, there was another string that were about half broke. And anyway, we loaded everything on he had one other helper there, loaded everything on this green broke string. And about 9:00, here came the string we were supposed to have down the trail. So we had to unload everything from that string. I ended up leading 2 mules. It was pitch black. We did everything by lantern light. And that milk, those 2 gallons of milk in glass jars were placed in a wooden pack box and put on a mule that I was leading. Anyway, we took off up the trail, and it was pitch black, and I was tired, but I love adventure, and I just trusted my mare, and I brought up the rear behind. 2 dudes were in front of me. They were terrified. So I had to just calm them down, say, it's okay. This guy knows what he's doing. Just let your horse have its head. And I remember the sparks off the rocks. You could see them, in the night. And I could hear the Imnaha rushing way down on this narrow trail. But I just felt like singing, because here I was going to go in the wilderness and be this camp cook. And I wanted to see what was going to happen to those 2 jars of milk that weren't even chilled. We got into camp. God, I don't know if it was midnight or what. the first thing Manfred did was take those 2 jugs of milk and put them in a stream that ran by camp. And so I opened up, did any more stew and fed everybody, got the fire going, fed everybody. And then I made lunches for next day's, the hunt started that morning early. So I was told I had to get up at 3. Okay. So I got up at 3. The lunches were made. I fixed them hot cakes. And I went, and Manfred said, now there's one guy here. He has to have oatmeal with walnuts and cream from that milk. And I went, okay. And by God, I went out there and got the milk, and the cream was there, so the guy got his oatmeal, his walnuts, and his cream, and he was happy. Because every year, that's what he had. And Manfred made that happen. I was so impressed. Anyway, off they went to hunt. I cleaned up everything. I had my little journal. I wrote everything down, even about that cream. And they came back in that evening, and they all had bucks, beautiful bucks. And they skinned them out, and I think that first night we had steaks because you could bring, I fixed baked potatoes, steak. I made a pie. I made sourdough bread. And anyway, it was all good.
Tell me about your sourdough starter.
Well, it's hard to tell anybody about sourdough because I've done it for so long. But sourdough is wild yeast. It comes from the air. It's bacteria that's desirable bacteria that is the rising action in bread or any product you want to make with it. And it takes a long time to master it. But I've done it for so many years. It's really hard to tell anybody how to do it. If people ask me, how do I make sourdough bread? I have to tell them that take 40 years like I did, and maybe you'll get a little good at it.
More than 40 years at this point, probably.
Yeah, more than 40 years. It's like making pies. I've made thousands of pies, and so good luck. Just go make a lot of pies. If you want to write. If you want to cook. I mean, it's not easy to learn.
So do you have any, I'm hesitant to ask at this point, but how do you make a pie crust? Because I feel like the crust is the thing that separates one pie from another pie. And I've had 1,000 of your pies. They're all incredible except for mincemeat, which I still think there's no excuse in the world for mincemeat pie. But the crust is like that's what really determines one pie from the next. How do you make a pie crust?
Well, I put some flour in a bowl, sprinkle a little salt over it.
Do you measure the flour or the salt?
No.
Absolutely not.
No. And I put some shortening in, or lard, or whatever I have in camp. And I sprinkle a little cold water over it and toss it with a fork. You don't want to handle it too much. You sure don't want to knead it. It's not bread. And then when it feels right, you just roll her out and put it on the pie.
That's so unhelpful.
Sorry.
Yeah. So just do that, daily for 40 years, which is actually more like 60 or 70 years. And then it might be right.
Yeah, most of the time it's right. Yeah.
What's your favorite lard?
Well, one time a grandson named James gave me bear fat, and I did use a little bit of that, and it was really good, but I don't recommend it because it's kind of hard to come by. But my favorite shortening is Crisco.
Yep. Tough to go wrong there. I think that those bear lard pies you made were a cut above. And that was a tough bear. I hunted for a long time to shoot that bear.
I know you did.
Well, you were talking about trapping when you were a little girl back in California, and you started teaching me to trap when I was super, super young. Teach me how to fish, teach me how to hunt. It was always an adventure as a little kid going over to your house there on Prairie Creek. And do you Do you think that those are still important things for kids to be learning today, or should they be kind of focusing on technology? Or, I mean, what's the place of hunting and fishing and trapping, and how has that changed throughout your life?
Well, I see it changing in many ways, but I think that every young person should be introduced to the natural world as soon as they're born. And one way to do that is to get outside, is to, in my case, was to just run a trap line. And I read a lot of books, and I don't know, for some reason I just gravitated toward adventure and being outdoors, and anything that took me outdoors. And so, I think every child is born loving nature. If you take a baby, like I took all my babies outside, whether they were born in the winter or spring or fall, and let them look at leaves and the way light plays on leaves and the sky, and feel the breeze, and smell a flower, and touch an animal. I think we've got away from that. They give them plastic toys. Everything's plastic. Get them outside, and we're all animals of nature, of the earth, and the earth is beautiful. I mean, even if you live in a city, there's trees and there's parks. Let them listen to the water. Play camping with them, because in our society today, we've grown away from nature. And Thoreau said, in wildness is the preservation of the world. And I think what he meant was that we have to get outside to get in touch with God, with nature, with the spirit. Whatever religion you are is all about nature. And the sooner you do that to a little child, that's a gift you give them. Because when things go wrong, and they will go wrong because life is hard, you have to have something solid you can rely on, and you can rely on the warmth of the sun and the stars and the moon coming up and the beauty. It's always there. It's never let you down. That's just what I believe.
I'm taking your great-grandson Hank hunting on Saturday, 2 days from now.
Yes.
He's 2.5, a little bit north of that. And I asked my sister if I could take him. And she had to think about it for a second. And I was like, come on, you don't want him to be a grown man and not know how to hunt. She's like, he's only 2.5. I was like, better late than never. Like, let's go. And I was definitely hunting, or, going on hunting trips at, probably 3 months old. I'm guessing because of, summer birthday, first hunting season, guaranteed I was going along. Now, that's not a reality for everybody. I get that. But good grief, if you get an opportunity to let your kid go out hunting or fishing or trapping or whatever, you got to do it.
You got to do it. And when you were little, James, I took you when you couldn't even walk. And I would show you things, you don't remember probably, but things in nature, growing things, and let you feel them. And then we would camp in the living room in a tent, and I would tell stories about hunting, and you just soaked them up. And then we'd go fishing, and I didn't really know how to fish too much, but I knew that if you let a line and a hook and a wiggly worm go underneath a root, that there'd be a trout, and I'd make sure it was hooked, and then I would give you the line to pull in, and you thought you brought it in. And that, catching a fish at a young age like that, you never forgot that.
Yeah. Adele showed Hank a picture of the moose that I got, and he goes, "Wow, that's a big moose." And she's like, "Yeah, it is." And then he says, "It's dead?" And she's like, "Yep, it's dead." And he goes, "It's meat now." Like, yeah, that's exactly how it works. And he used to think that, or used to say that it was boxes now, because all the beef that he's used to being around is carried in boxes. Just the nature of a kid growing up on a on a beef operation. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what it's like for him to wake up early in the morning and hike out there and sit still and be quiet and hear a gun go off and see a deer and see it get gutted and all that stuff. It'll be really interesting to figure out, for me, how to introduce him to that in a way that's a good experience for him, and kind of watch him put all that together. But I see a lot of people really trying to protect their kids from, the realities of life and death, and they would think that it was just way too early for a kid like that to be around it. But the way I see it, for the last, however long humans have been around, this is what we do. Like, there's no way that tribal societies protected their kids from hunting. They're like, you need to start doing this soon because you're eating more. You need to contribute. And there's really not a better feeling than being able to provide meat to your family. And if you can do that as a young boy or girl, it's an incredible sense of accomplishment and responsibility, and it gives you a good start.
It does. And you know what? Little Hank, he's engaged. He's there, he's present, he pays attention, and he's going to soak it all in, and it's going to be a good experience, especially with an uncle like you. Yeah, because you understand. But I think these kids that are introduced to hunting and fishing, it's not only a rite of passage, but it's just a wonderful thing that you can't take away from them in life. And life is different now. It's just harder. That used to be, everybody kind of did that, but we got a lot of forces at work that don't think that's that it's cruel to shoot animals and stuff, but it isn't. And those children will be more mature and able to handle what life throws at us when they have those experiences young. They get it. It's just lots of lessons there that I don't think people really understand, and mainly being treated like a little adult. Children know a lot more than we think they do. You don't want to talk down to any little kid, because if you engage them, they get it. Get down to their level, and don't talk down to them. Just get down to their level and talk to them and treat them like little human beings, because that's what they are. They're our future. And the ones that aren't being talked to are the ones that are our little lost souls right now. That's our mental institutions, our wellness things are full of them. But you give a child that gift of treating him like an equal and teaching him things and in the right way. That's the best gift you can give a young person today, I think.
No, I completely agree. Now, I don't have any kids, so I don't know, but I'm around them sometimes, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You have a lot of experience because you have 4 children, and then how many grandchildren?
19.
And then great-grandchildren?
Well, quite frankly, when we reached 40, I kind of lost track. I have to sit down and kind of recount, I think.
So over 40 great-grandchildren.
Over 40 great-grandchildren.
Yeah, pretty amazing.
That's what happens when you get married at 17 and have your first baby at 18.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's an amazing thing, the impact you've had on all of us. And now you get to live in this place on Alder Slope, just where you wanted to.
Yes, I always wanted to be back on Alder Slope, and I'm truly blessed. I have a beautiful home and 20 acres here, and
we got the eagle caps jumping out of the ground right behind us and looking out over the prairie, and then the 7 Devils of Idaho over Hell's Canyon out the other window. Got deer and pheasants and way too many barn cats around. How many gardens are you taking care of these days?
Oh, goodness. Well, I have one down at Sheep Creek. I was just down there this morning. Lots of tomatoes still on, and flowers. And I spent 4 months down there writing, working on my book. In June, I put a garden over where your dad lives. Your dad's bought the place that I had originally. Beautiful black loam there. So I've had a garden there for 10 years. And then even after I married Doug, I came back up and maintained a garden there, and pretty big garden.
And you're rototilling by hand. You're weeding by hand. That rototiller that you have looks like a torture device.
No, that keeps you in shape. Yeah, at 8, how old am I? I just turned 88. That keeps you want to keep moving. Don't quit moving. And that builds up your muscles. And gardens keep you in shape. Hoeing and everything about a garden keeps you in shape. I just love to garden. Gardening isn't work to me. It's fun. And then you get to eat all that nutritious food.
Yeah. Well, I'm not much on the gardening, but I'm happy to trade you a chunk of meat for a potato every once in a while.
All right.
And those tomatoes you raised down in Sheep Creek are, that's the peak of what a tomato can be. Those are the best.
They are the best. Imnaha tomatoes have a reputation.
When's the last time you went hunting?
Oh, goodness. Probably 20 years ago. I don't know. Time just gets ahead of me. I think I shot an elk. Yeah. Oh, and then I used to grouse hunt. That's really fun. A little single shot shotgun. I love to shoot grouse.
And you shot all your elk with a 243?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, I love that. I remember crawling on my husband and I crawled on our bellies, just scooched along it felt like a half a mile up this hill, and it was worth it because there was 6 bulls. I got to pick out which one I wanted.
Yeah, I've got a picture of you on my fridge with a mule deer buck that you killed and holding his head up there. A lot of people today think that we shouldn't take pictures like that anymore. I don't understand that.
No, I don't either. But James, they're just raised so far away from. They just read, like Bambi. We call it the Bambi thing. But there's so much information out there that's just not true, because harvesting a wild animal to eat is a spiritual thing. After I'd shoot an elk, I'd kind of say a little prayer, thanking him for the meat, and we eat all the meat, even the neck. Make mincemeat that you don't like, that your father does, and that mincemeat's real mincemeat. By the way, I made a mincemeat pie. This was a Nash family recipe that Granddad Nash came up with, and it's passed down, and it's the real thing. Yeah, it's good stuff. Sorry you don't like it, but
do you ever make vinegar pie anymore?
We made it for that fish trap.
That was really good.
Yeah, well, if you like that, you'd probably like mincemeat if you close your eyes.
Those are completely different things. Completely different things. I think Dad just likes mincemeat so that he can get a pie that he doesn't have any competition for, because nobody else can stomach it.
There's going to be a lot of people like mincemeat. It's full of apples, home-pressed apple cider, raisins, currants, all those good things, vinegar.
And neck meat.
Yeah, but the neck meat is simmered on a wood cook stove till it just falls off the neck. And then it's put through one of those old-fashioned meat grinders, and you can't tell it's meat. It soaks up all of the, all that good stuff. And it even has, Karo syrup in it. And, oh, man, it's delicious.
Mm.
Lots of apples. And it has to be home-pressed apple cider. You have to have the right ingredients. And no suet. I don't use suet. But I put a lot of butter on top of the pie. Pretty good.
What's your take on medicine?
Medicine? I don't like medicine.
Yeah. So you ever get achy and want to take a Tylenol or anything like that?
And I don't think I've taken 2 Tylenol my whole life, and I don't take aspirin because they made my nose bleed. No, I'm not a pill taker.
Yeah, just eat food.
Yeah, if you eat good food, my gosh, you breathe good air and think good thoughts and exercise and like down there at the creek today, I ate a whole tomato and maybe some parsley and I think about everything goes in my mouth. I think, is this going to be good for me? And it's amazing what it does. Makes you feel good.
Well,
Good meat, lots of meat. I would eat beefsteak for breakfast, hamburger for lunch, in spite of what they say. I eat meat and I'm strong.
yeah. No, you're extremely
Elk,
strong.
elk, venison, my fresh eggs from my chickens, my sourdough bread, my canned fruit. I don't go to the grocery store a lot.
No, you're rototilling gardens, multiple gardens by hand every year at age 88. I think that what you're doing is working. Yeah.
I hope so. I can't wait to get up in the morning because I'm still alive. I'm not in the obits. And I'm afraid I'll miss something. The deer are coming out in the field, or a fox or coyote or chuckers or quail.
Are there any bucks out here I need to know about right now?
Well, there was 2 little forked horns, but since bow season, I haven't seen them lately.
Okay. Forked horns don't do well during archery season in the valley.
No, I don't think so. They're a little dumb.
Yeah, they slip up. They slip up and get rednecked pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That's all right. I've shot some forked horns. I'm probably going to shoot some more. Might shoot one on Saturday.
They're good eating, and I'll tell you, these whitetail that eat this alfalfa out here, they ought to melt in your mouth.
Mm-hmm. Pretty darn good.
Yeah, I don't really like to hunt for horns. I know if I was your age and a guy, I would, because it's pretty important. But I just right now would hunt for meat. And man, I love a liver and onions and some sourdough bread. And yeah, that's good.
Well, I can bring you a liver this weekend if you want some liver.
Oh man, I
never do anything with them. I ate a bunch of liver when I was in Africa, but we diced it up super small and fry it. And it was good, but those big chunks of liver like you like, that's not really my speed.
Well, I don't do big chunks. The best liver is in elk camp. Well, I don't eat elk liver too much, but venison liver is in, deer camp. And you take bacon, cook bacon real crisp and take it off and save the grease and dredge that. If you slice it thin, dredge it in flour and fry it in that bacon grease and lots of onions and, oh God, ketchup. Oh, there's just nothing like it.
Yeah, I'm gonna stick to the tenderloins and backstrap,
Well,
make jerky and sausage out of the rest of it.
Yeah, I tell you, venison steak, dredged in flour, cooked in bacon grease or whatever, and mashed potatoes or homemade biscuits, and milk gravy. That's what I raised your dad on, was my kids on. Milk gravy, mashed potatoes, and venison or elk.
Yeah.
They were raised on that.
And me too. We had jerseys all the time, and mostly we'd have them for bummer calves in the springtime.
Yeah.
But I was not great at milking those jerseys. I've got big hands, they've got small teats, and I just kind of wanted to get the job done. And Mom would go out there and they'd just relax, and it's so much easier to milk. But like your dad, he sang to the cows, didn't he, when he was milking?
Oh yeah, he sang all the songs from the musicals, like Oklahoma. Oh, what a beautiful morning, and he'd sing love songs to my mama. He was very romantic. He loved my mama, and he would sing songs to her. I don't think she heard them, but we heard them. And the acoustics in the dairy barn were really good. Daddy could have been an opera singer. He had a voice like Caruso. Beautiful voice. But
didn't one of your uncles write music for Broadway?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Uncle Johnny. He was all about music. That's all he did. He wrote all the scores for Music Circus in Sacramento and wrote music, played the piano, made arrangements. Yeah, he was very talented.
And he had another uncle who was a famous engineer, right? Built these giant bridges and dams and stuff like that.
Well, Uncle Stanley worked on the Aswan Dam and also on the Space Needle. He lived in Seattle, traveled all over the world.
Yeah.
My mother's brothers.
It's amazing the talent that you see when you start looking into families, you know.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of
Yeah.
a lot of unique skills that kind of get melded together, and then, you know, every generation is a product of all of those people.
Yep. Like you, James.
Yep. Coming from you, coming from your dad. Yeah, you're just a product of everybody before you, and I think it's important to talk about these stories about, you know, the events that made people who they were, and how they weathered those storms.
Yep. Life is short, really short. It's too bad that we have to get old to get some wisdom. But, it takes all getting knocked down and making mistakes and getting up and then finally when you're 80 or so, you do it all over again because that's what makes you who you are. And nobody really makes a mistake. You're just trying to find your way and survive. And life is hard, and you do the best you can. And we all make mistakes. Mistakes aren't bad because otherwise, how would you learn?
Yeah. Ideally, you learn from other people's mistakes, but I've never been all that good at that. So just kind of make my own mistakes, usually more than once. Well, besides some venison liver, do you have any other wild game requests for this fall? I brought you some salmon and some halibut and some cod earlier this year.
Oh my goodness. That halibut was, I can't even tell you how good that halibut was. And I cooked it to perfection, with crumbs, and it was delicious. Oh my goodness, you've given me so much good stuff, James, but I love wild meat. I love elk and venison and always love fish.
I've got a little bit of moose I was able to bring back. We gave most of that moose away, but I'll try and bring you some moose too.
Yeah, I've never eaten moose.
It's good.
I bet.
I hadn't either, and I ate a piece of the tenderloin raw when we were cleaning it, and then we cooked some up in the tent that night. It was fantastic. Yeah, I loved it.
Oh, I've read lots of books about the North and moose meat. They seem to really like moose meat.
Yeah. Well, Grandma, you've got great stories. Appreciate your time. We're probably going to do this again, get into some more stories. But you have any advice for the good listeners of this show from your 88 years of wisdom and experience?
Well, just don't take life for granted. It's just a gift to be born and be on this earth. And no matter where you are, there's opportunity. There's beauty. Just get up and enjoy each day for what it is, and help people. There's joy in helping people, helping raise children, be kind to old people. Just enjoy life.
Couldn't have said it better.
I live in an old cabin with bad to non-existent insulation and wood heat. That cabin can see snow every month of the year and needs a good amount of firewood stacked in the woodshed to carry through the colder months. This spring, as my woodpile turned to smoke and ash, I noticed something metal pushing out of the decades of sawdust and bark. I kicked at it and unearthed a Stanley thermos. The cup was missing, and it showed more worn stainless steel than green. There were dents in the metal, and the handle looked like a puppy had chewed on it, but it still hadn't leaked the old coffee I could feel slosh inside. It took me back to memories of cutting firewood with my dad, waking up early for an elk hunt, or going out to the canyons to gather cattle. A Stanley thermos has the durability to survive whatever hard work you throw at it. You may find it carries memories as well as coffee. Learn more about their new and classic line of products at stanley1913.com or at your local sporting goods store. And catch you next week. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the show with a friend. You can also rate the podcast and leave a review. Your support allows me to keep doing what I love, which is meeting incredible folks and sharing their stories with you. For more content and photos, follow the show on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast or me at Six Ranch Outfitters. This episode was produced by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch Podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. Tune in every Monday for a brand new episode of the Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.